Kronos cannot sleep. He is plagued by visions of his death and the annihilation of his domain. Nightmare-ridden and tortured by the echo of lightning, he leaves his bed atop of Olympus and wanders the silent fields of the gods. His pulse is agitated as he thinks of his progeny and his ancestors. The Titan King has already committed the two most damning abominations, kinslaying of the highest degree, for both his sons and daughters and his father have been slain by his hand. As he reaches the peak of Olympus, he gazes at the sky, plagued by the brilliant stars typical of the late night, and in that cosmic gaze, he glimpses at the brutal stead of Uranus, his father. He thinks of the prophecy that warns of a new god that would dethrone and shame him, the damned beast of lightning, and he wonders if his father also wandered the land, plagued by the same fears that haunt him. Did he ever thought of ending me? Is there a universe where Kronos is nothing but a nameless boy in Uranus's belly? Welcome to Epic Tales, where we look for answers in the legends of our past. The concept of patricide is a common motif in many myths, the idea of the young gods taking over the place of the old and condemning their predecessor to brutal revenge and bitter shame. Usually moved by prophecy, the gods and heroes of myths are moved to commit patricide in their attempts to fulfill or avoid some sort of set fate. It is perhaps in Greek mythology where this event occurs more often, for it was Kronos who defeated his father, and Zeus who, in turn, defeated him. In many stories, it is also prophesied that Zeus will eventually fall at the hands of his sons. But more on that later. It seems undeniable that the poets of the past found this idea captivating, such as Hesiod, who wrote the Greek myths Theogony, where most of our knowledge of the Greek gods' genealogy comes from, and where the stories of Kronos' rise and fall are dictated. The human explanation behind it tends to be related to the progress of society, as a way to explain how the pull of the future is reconciled with the comfortability of the past. Old and decrepit gods must make a way for young and agile ones, just as the old morals and ways of being must succumb to the future. Tradition and progress, it seems, are locked in an endless struggle, one pushing forward towards a promising unknown, and the other one digging its heels and warning of the uncertainty of change with the calm voice of experience. But there seems to be another, more epic and insidious explanation to it. Just as the cycle of patricide operates as a quiet whisper in the ears of the poets of the past to try to explain the pull of the future in their society, so is a much darker force at play in the canonical world of myth. And nowhere in this pernicious and malignant influence is more clear than in the future of Zeus. You can learn how Zeus became a god of Olympus in another one of our videos, linked above. But here, it's enough to know that during the events preceding the Titanomachy, that is, the conflict between the Olympians and the Titans, Zeus is depicted as a very positive figure. Hesiod, the poet from which we have received these stories, wanted his readers and listeners to consider the young Olympian along the lines of the paradigm of the righteous young prince of prophecy. The young man, whose fate was to defeat the monster that rules the world, rising to the top of Olympus, saving his brothers and sisters and vanquishing the Titans and becoming the king of the gods, thereby salvaging the future and vindicating his entire bloodline. But it is at that point where the dark force of godhood begins to wrap around the young Olympian as he wanders the fields of Olympus after the defeat of his father. This darkness plants the same seeds of mania in Zeus's mind that Kronos once experienced. After Zeus's rise, his figure is no longer treated as kindly by the narrator of those stories. He slowly becomes a brutal, vain, and lustful monster along the lines of what Kronos once embodied. His righteousness gives way to a cholerical and spiteful persona that lashes violently against other gods that wrong him, as he mindlessly plays with the fate of humans and heroes, tying them in petty struggles for his sheer amusement. He also fathers 1,000 demigods by cheating, cursing, and lying to human women, only to satisfy his endless and disgusting desires. Our hero of prophecy has apparently become the monster he once defeated. This darkness that commands Zeus reaches its peak in the moment of lyrical parallelism, that is, in my opinion, deliberately depicted as a way for the author of those stories to indicate that Zeus has become a dark god ripe for dethroning, and that the young prince is no longer there. Not long after the Tenomachy, while the scars of the young Olympian still drip blood, Zeus took the young Metis as a wife. She was a wise and profoundly intelligent woman, her name meaning something akin to cunning knowledge. So clever was Metis that she had the gift of prophecy, and so in love she was with the young king of the gods that she decided to tell her husband about one of them. One day she will bear a son, a young man who would embody the goodness and kindness of a world so in need of a savior. This young boy will inherit the world and will possess a power far larger than that of the Olympians, far larger than that of Zeus himself, too. And it is in that point, at the nexus of the path which Zeus has walked his entire life, that the darkness which lies atop of Olympus takes hold of the king. There is a world where the darkness does not win Zeus's heart. There is a timeline where the king of the gods weeps at his wife's words, and the young god is born and leads humanity to a holy future, extending the wonders of Elysium across the world, making heaven on earth. However, that is not our timeline. Here, the seeds of mania that corrupted Kronos had grown and wrapped their vines around Zeus's inside, now no more than a puppet to the mindless shade. Zeus devoured Metis without hesitation, thereby pruning the timeline of events and spitting fate in the face. One must wonder if, after doing so, that night he felt some kicks on his stomach. Did Zeus ever wonder the brutality of his action? Was he ravaged by nightmares as his father Kronos was? Was the quiet voice of the Prince of Prophecy that he used to be crying in horror inside of himself? Does Zeus turn his head in shame as he sees depiction of his heroic triumph against the Titans, knowing that he's not better than the monsters there? We have covered what happened to the Titans after Zeus's victory in another video. We know that Kronos is tied in Tartarus, the darkest and most brutal region of Hades' underworld. There, we also talk about the story told by the poet Pindar, who extends on the classic tale of the Titanomachy, where Zeus is plagued by nightmares of his father's suffering and decides to release him. Is it possible, I wonder, that night, where Zeus released the monster from his very deserved punishment, that it was the darkness once again pulling Zeus' strings? Or perhaps a much sadder tale, that Zeus, brutalized by a depressive agony for his actions, thought that only that wailing monster could understand his pain, and wandered down to the Styx, hooded as to conceal his identity, and looked at his father with crying eyes and whispered, "Father, I've done terrible things." And Cronus will laugh and savor his son's agony as if it were the sweetest of ambrosias. Thank you so much for watching Epic Tales. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please consider subscribing if you like this episode and look forward to other ones that are coming, like the dark gods of mythology and the possible Ragnarok of Olympus.